in a relationship like this. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. We're also talking about relationships with family members, friends, at work. We'll talk about some work-specific issues that happen when you have ADHD that can tend to lead to emotional abuse and gaslighting in the workplace. So we'll cover that as well. So a little bit about me. So I'm an American Mental Health Counseling Association Diplomate and clinical mental health specialist in child and adolescent counseling. There's about 20 of us in the US with that dual designation. I'm a national certified counselor, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida, and also Florida Supreme Court certified family and circuit mediator. One of the things I do is collaborative divorce. So we have both parties with their attorneys and a financial representative in the room, and I am in the front of the room. And I help facilitate the divorce process. And that way everyone's on the same page. So everybody's co-parenting in a way that they are cooperating more. And research has shown that collaborative divorce, as opposed to traditional divorce, kids that have parents that go through the collaborative divorce model tend to have healthier relationships in the future and a lower rate of divorce. So also, there's my books, which I mentioned. And again, there's Gaslighting, Recognizing Manipulative and Emotionally Abusive People and Break Free. And in August of 2022, which is this year, I have a book out called Surviving a Toxic Relationship. So how do you get out, and then how do you rebuild your life afterwards? And that, again, doesn't just mean romantic relationships. It can mean work relationships. It can mean family relationships, because unfortunately, we'll find out that sometimes the best course of action is to go no contact with people, especially people that are really damaging to our spirit, to our psyche. And we'll talk a little bit about that and what to do if you can't go no contact. So also, I was awarded the APA Outstanding Dissertation Award for Executive Function Performance in Pediatric ADHD. And my study found that girls were more likely to have comorbid oppositional defiant disorder than boys, which kind of is a little bit different than what the other research had shown. So that was pretty interesting to find that girls tend to have oppositional defiant disorder. They just tend to be a little more covert or sneaky about it, which leads into also bullying, which leads into gaslighting. So we'll talk more about that too. So I did my training and my degrees at University of Florida. So if you have any questions about alligators, let me know. Again, I live in the Tampa Bay area. We have alligators. I publish in Journal of Attention Disorders, ADHD Report. I'm a senior contributor for Forbes. I also contribute to Psychology Today and Huffington Post. I have a podcast called Talking Brains. And I don't know if you've had Mark Burton on to speak. He's a developmental pediatrician. He's excellent. I have podcasts where we talk about mindfulness and ADHD. And we also have other podcasts about ADHD, and we have podcast episodes about gaslighting. So you can check that out. Any major podcast broadcaster like Apple, Overcast, Stitcher. Also on my website, I have links to those. And also, just as an aside too, I saw Roberto Alvardia speaking on sleep and ADHD. I highly recommend that you attend that talk. I've seen him talk on that several times. He's also a buddy of mine. He's excellent. So that's in October. So I also have a private practice, and I do teletherapy. Right now, I'm just doing teletherapy from Tampa Bay. And also I lecture on PTSD as a result of relationships, toxic relationships, domestic violence, but I also specialize in a natural disaster PTSD because I live in a stick in the middle of the ocean. So we tend to have hurricanes quite a bit. I think I've been through 6 or 7 hurricanes at this point. So that's the other thing I specialize in is coping after natural disasters. Because people with ADHD, we tend to have more PTSD after trauma than other people because we have some genetic markers that other people don't have that make us more prone to developing it. So my website, I have resources on there. I also have other articles you can read on gaslighting. I have videos on gaslighting. My YouTube channel, you can see videos on there. If you want to see pictures of dogs and food, I have my Instagram page where I also put pictures of stuff related to gaslighting as well, but mostly food and stuff and travels. So I think that's about it. So if you go on the website too, there's all the blog episodes or the podcast episodes. I have a blog on there where I post my Psychology Today articles and just a lot of great resources. So if you go to the resources tab, you can also see on the resources tab, you'll see a list of books that I recommend about gaslighting, not just my book, but all the other ones I recommend. And so if I talk about a book tonight while I'm presenting, you probably can find that book, a click button that takes you through to Amazon. So if I mention a book, you can probably just go to the website, look under resources, recommended books on gaslighting, and you can click right through to Amazon. I also have a page for ADHD as well, books I recommend on that. So what we're going to talk about is what is gaslighting? what is this anyway, this term gaslighting? Where does it come from? We're going to talk about what is a toxic relationship and why we are more vulnerable to gaslighting and toxic relationships as people with ADHD. And what's the difference between a toxic relationship and poor communication? I had someone email me one time and say, well, I think I just have poor communication in my relationship. I don't think it's gaslighting. And then proceeded to tell me about the gaslighting he was doing. So we'll talk a little bit about what's the difference between, ADHD related issues of communication because of our executive functions of reconstitution of information. Sometimes what we're thinking and then what we say can be different things. But this is not that. So this is a concerted effort to try to get you to question your version of reality and to make you think that you're going crazy. So again, we'll talk more about what the difference is between poor communication and gaslighting. And also, why is it so difficult for us to remove ourselves from these relationships? Some of that has to do with self-esteem issues. Some of it has to do with past trauma. Some of it has to do with the fact that, I'm biased, but I think we have great personalities. We look for the good in people, and we tend to sometimes look at potential rather than where people really are. And we tend to be more forgiving of a wide range of behaviors, which sometimes they're behaviors that should not be accepted by us. So we'll talk more about that. And also how to rebuild if you go no contact or low contact. We'll also touch on co-parenting when you are co-parenting with a narcissist or gaslighter. So how did I get into this thing about gaslighting, even though I specialize in ADHD? So I've been in practice for about 20 years, and I noticed over time, more and more people were bringing up issues of gaslighting. They started using the word gaslighting. Particularly, I noticed millennials, Gen Z clients were bringing up the term gaslighting. I'm from Gen X. Gen X baby boomers, they were talking more about just communication issues. And I noticed, but younger people are talking more about experiencing gaslighting in their relationships and knowing that it was a form of emotional abuse. So the education is getting out there, which is wonderful. And I noticed that more and more people were telling me about being in relationships where the power and control dynamic was off. Because in a healthy relationship, you have equal give and take. In these relationships, the person with ADHD is treated as less than. They are treated as someone that can do no right. When in the beginning of the relationship, they're told they could do no wrong, and now they are being devalued. So they're love bombed in the beginning, which means that they're told how wonderful they are, and who doesn't like hearing that? But the problem is that it's way overdone. And people with ADHD, we tend to really get a good dopamine boost from people giving us positive feedback. And also it may be that we've always felt kind of one step outside everyone. And here's someone telling us our ADHD characteristics are endearing rather than being kind of an issue for us. And so we gobble that up. But then once you're in the relationship, the person starts changing and they start criticizing you, and it starts building and building. That's known as devaluing. And then eventually they do what's called a discard, which means that they either dump you like a hot potato, or they will still kind of stick around and try to hoover you back in, hoovering like the vacuum cleaner. They try to suck you back into the relationship. And they usually keep their exes in rotation because it's easier for them to seek a new narcissistic supply, or it's easier for them to reconnect with an old narcissistic supply than to seek a new one. These are people that are constantly needing attention. And if you have a relationship that's brand new, it's shiny and new, and you have that romantic phase of the relationship, narcissists are all there for that because that serves their best interest. But, in any relationship after that 6 months to a year period, or even sooner, that's when the newness wears off and you have like the real person, and you'll start seeing that the unpleasant side starts coming out. So the narcissistic supply means that, this person eventually is going to feel like the supply isn't new for them anymore. And they may start going out and seeking new supply, which people with ADHD are prone to having partners that have increased rate of infidelity in this type of personality. So narcissists tend to have multiple relationships going at once because they need to keep that narcissistic supply up. If a person confronts a person that's gaslighting and say, hey, what you said is not okay with me, and you violate a boundary of mine, the person may go into what's called narcissistic rage. This is where their face may even look like it's changing. They will start pointing the finger back at you, saying you're too sensitive. They'll blame your ADHD and say, if you weren't so ADHD, I wouldn't have done this or that. They try to get the focus off themselves. So we'll talk more about that. So again, I started seeing this term gaslighting used more and more by people with ADHD. Particularly around 2015, 2016, Also around the hashtag Me Too movement, I started having people coming in and mentioning instances of gaslighting and abuse in the workplace. And then that led to me writing a Psychology Today article, 11 Warning Signs of Gaslighting. It went viral and went double viral. I was speaking in Maryland, and I not only had norovirus, but the article also went viral. So while I'm throwing up in the emergency room, the doctor says to me, "How are you doing?" I said, I held up my phone. I said, "I just went viral on Psychology Today." He's like, "Oh, you're double viral." And I was like, "Nice." So now I just say I'm double viral. So gaslighting came out in October 2018. Again, the Toxic Relationships book is coming out in August. So again, I have had more and more people just over the 20 years of practice start mentioning that the actual term gaslighting and mentioning emotional abuse. So gaslighting is a series of behaviors with the explicit intention of gaining control of you. So this person will try to isolate you from family and friends. They will tell you that you're crazy. They will tell you that what you saw and heard isn't what happened, because they're trying to make you rely on their version of reality. And they love nothing more than to isolate you from the people that may tell you that this is not a healthy relationship. So they may tell you, "Well, your sister said this about you, and I didn't want to have to tell you this, but I think you have a right to know." That's called triangulating, when they are trying to pit you against another person. Now, the chances are your sister never said anything bad about you, but what the gaslighter is trying to do is to get you mad at your sister so you no longer talk to her. And again, the gaslighter is the only person in your life. They will systematically break you apart.
I'm listening to the lecture Bella gave me. Interesting.
So again, the goal is to keep you off kilter and to make you question your reality. So again, you're told that what you saw and heard isn't what happened. I have had clients that have had items hit on them, usually items of high monetary or sentimental value, and they are told that they're irresponsible. If they didn't have ADHD, they would be able to find their stuff, when in fact the gaslighters hid their belongings, to the point where one of my clients left herself Post-it notes saying where she left her items because she had a feeling that she was not the one moving them. And she finally said to her spouse one day, she said, "I think I'm going to call the police and file a report because now I'm missing my wedding ring and this, that, and the other." And he magically made them appear. He brought them out and said, "No, look, I found them all under the bed. I don't know who did that." I think he blamed like the house cleaner or somebody. But she very clearly knew that he had been hiding her items, because he would steal her wedding ring. He would hide it and tell her, "Well, you don't care about our marriage, and that's why you lost your wedding ring. And, your ADHD makes you impossible to live with," when in fact he was hiding things on her. So this is a part of emotional abuse, which is part of domestic violence. So this is a form of domestic violence, and emotional abuse is known as the invisible form of abuse, because this isn't something that you see. So it's something that you experience, but it doesn't leave marks. But it can, and some studies have found that emotional abuse can cause even more damage to you psychologically than physical abuse can. And anytime you have any type of abuse in a relationship, it increases the lethality of that relationship. So having emotional abuse makes you more likely to have physical abuse, which makes it more likely that you can get killed if you try to leave the relationship. So again, being told that what you saw or heard isn't what happened. This is a person who will have their hand in the cookie jar and they will say, "Nope, I didn't take any cookies. You didn't see my hand in the cookie jar." They'll blatantly lie to you. If you show them video proof. So if you had your Ring camera on and you saw them, taking something from your front porch and you show them the video, they will tell you, "You misinterpreted that. I just moved it to the side. I didn't take that Amazon package. I just moved it. You're not seeing that correctly." They will do whatever it takes to try to change your mind about what you're seeing. They will tell you that it's not real. They tend to obsessively accuse you of cheating. This is projection, because they're actually cheating. And so they will say that you are, to take the focus off them, to preemptively kind of shift the focus to you. And they will also demand to see your phone, and they will find an innocuous message between you and a coworker and claim that you're having an affair with that coworker, when in fact, again, the gaslighter is usually the one that's having the extramarital relationships. They're cheating, they're having emotional affairs, going online, meeting people. So again, they're seeking narcissistic supply. So people with ADHD that are in these types of relationships will usually spend a lot of time on Google looking at, why does my spouse think I'm cheating? and they'll spend a lot of time trying to figure out what they're doing wrong, when in fact, they're not the problem in the relationship. So again, if you try to leave, the gaslighter will try to hoover you back in, suck you back in, because they're losing their narcissistic supply. And even if they have backup supply and other people, they still don't want to lose that connection with you because you feed some need of theirs. So again, you love bombing in the beginning of a relationship where you're told that you're the most wonderful thing in the world, but this is way overdone. It starts really early in a relationship, even on the first date. On the first date, you may be asked to move in with the person. The relationship moves way too quickly. You're put up on a pedestal. And when you're put up on a pedestal, eventually you fall off the pedestal and it's a long way down. So what started out as idyllic, you're told that you're the most amazing thing in the world. And now all of a sudden you are told that you are lower than dirt. So you are then what's called devalued and then eventually discarded. So triangulating, like I mentioned, that's pitting people against each other. Coworkers will do this. They'll say that, that your coworker said something bad about you, or your coworker gave you the wrong time of meeting when they actually told you the right time, but your other coworker wanted you to miss the meeting, so it makes you look bad. These are people that will do whatever it takes to burn your career down to the ground. They also, again, do splitting, which means that they will either see people as all good or all bad. They have no in between. So you're either the most precious sweet muffin that ever existed, or you're a terrible person and you will never recover from that. I mean, they have one way or the other. You tend to see this behavior in narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, but you can also see it in people that don't meet a diagnostic label. So you can see it in people that maybe they grew up with parents that this is the way their parents function, that they were dysfunctional parents. And so kids watch their parents like hawks as to what behavior they should have. And so you have people that wind up behaving like this, not realizing this is a dysfunctional behavior. But they may come to the realization that, wait a second, the way I've been doing things isn't working. Or they may have a partner say, hey, the way that you're acting isn't okay with me, and we need to get some help. And that person may seek counseling. However, if someone has narcissistic personality disorder, another one of these personality disorders I've listed, they tend to have what's called an egocentric personality. And that means that they think that they're fine and everyone else has the problem. So if they go to therapy, it's because they're bringing their spouse in, and they'll tell the therapist that they need their spouse to be fixed. And when you ask them what their contribution is to the relationship, they'll say, I'm fine. Everything is her ADHD, or everything is due to, her being anxious, or they'll just blame the other person for everything and they won't take any personal responsibility. Either way, whether someone arrives at this behavior from learning it from dysfunctional parents, or if they're purposely doing it, either way, they're 100% responsible for their behavior. And either way, it's a form of emotional abuse, domestic violence. So gaslighting is not just somebody in a bad mood once in a while. This is a concerted effort to, again, undermine you, make you question your reality, so you rely more on their version of reality. It's not poor communication. Poor communication would be what I'm trying to say and what I'm saying are two different things, or you feel like you're not understood. This is, again, a calculated effort to cause you to feel like that you are less than, that the gaslighter is the superior person, that they have the correct version of reality, and that you're going crazy. So it's not a temporary event. This is something that this person has displayed across relationships. Although they may tell their partner, hey, this is the first time I've ever had a problem with somebody in a relationship, so it must be you. That's usually a lie. They usually have had a track record of relationships where this was an issue, their behavior. Or they may have a track record of jobs where they were fired because of gaslighting, emotional, abusive behavior. This isn't something that's immediately apparent. You have people that have been in relationships for decades that will come to see me. And they put the pieces together that this is what's going on in their relationship. So this is something, again, that can ramp up fairly slowly, and it starts out pretty idyllic. There's also a phase of a relationship. In an abusive relationship, you have the honeymoon phase, you have the build up to the explosion, you have the explosion, and then you have the remorse phase. However, gaslighters will never apologize to you. They will say, I'm sorry that your feelings got hurt by what I did, which is not a real apology. A real apology is, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. This is what I'm going to do to work on this. So the gaslighter, again, will not apologize. If they apologize, it's facetiously, sarcastically, but again, they do not take responsibility for their behavior. Now, where this term came from, gaslighting, is that there's a play in 1930s and then a movie in 1940s called Gaslight. And Ingrid Bergman's in the 1940s movie. Check it out. It's about a guy that changes the amount of gas in the gas lights. So he's making the house dimmer. And when he does that, the wife says, hey, looks like the gas lights are dimming. And he's like, nope, you're just going crazy, in an attempt to get at her family's money. So again, gaslight is literally a gaslight that he was changing the intensity of the gas being put in the gaslight and then telling her that she was losing her mind. Because again, as she turns over her whole, psyche to him, then he can manipulate her even more. I have seen people that are manipulated with their finances. So not only do gaslighters prey upon people with ADHD and depression, anxiety, but also people going through grief because they are also vulnerable. I have had people that have turned over their finances to a person that's a gaslighter, because the gaslighter will say, you're grieving, you can't even control your finances, or you have ADHD, you are so bad with money, I need to take care of it. And I've had people, sign over their houses, their accounts. They've signed over everything to the gaslighter. The gaslighter is running through their money. Unfortunately, that happens more often than you would think. So where can you experience a toxic relationship or gaslighting? Family of origin. So your parents may have pitted kids against each other. So you have the golden child and the scapegoat. So you have the kid that can do no right, and you have the kid that can do no wrong. Even to the point that on birthdays, you'll have a kid that the golden child would get all these great presents, brand new things, and the scapegoat will get hand-me-downs, and this has nothing to do with monetary status. It's just the parents just they treat the scapegoat like they're the bad kid. And you can see like maybe ADHD kids wind up being the scapegoat a lot of times because they're seen as a quote unquote problem kid. So also people with ADHD are more likely to have a history of physical abuse and emotional abuse. So also siblings. So if you have siblings that you grew up with that were golden children or scapegoats, that relationship tends to stick into adulthood. So you may have parents that are aging and your siblings say to you, hey, I know that you haven't, always been there and you're a jerk and everything, but mom needs to be taken care of. So it's your job. So the golden children can still pick on the scapegoats. Also, there can be a lot of jealousy from the scapegoat to the golden child because they're the ones that are always treated well. And the parents will switch back and forth between who's the scapegoat and golden child based on who they view as loyal. Loyalty to a gaslighter is not questioning the gaslighter at all, doing exactly what they want. If they're able to get something out of you, you're considered the golden child. But the second that you say no or set a boundary or they can't get anything out of you, now you become the scapegoat. So it'll flip around really quickly on people. In the workplace, your employer may gaslight you. They may write down a performance evaluation that is full of lies because they want you moved out of the company, because they may want space for a friend of theirs to work there, or they may just sometimes target somebody. There's really no rhyme or reason to it. Also, coworkers will try to get you fired. They'll move stuff around on your desk and you come back and you're like, I think my stuff's been moved. Everybody's like, no, you're so sensitive. Nobody moved your stuff. You're ADHD. You lose your stuff all the time. So, and again, with ADHD, we tend to question ourselves, right? Because we're used to losing stuff or being disorganized. But this is a concerted effort to get you out of the workplace, to demote you. And sometimes people that are mean just pick on someone. So also intimate part relationships, we've discussed. Friends. This is the frenemy situation where you have a friend that really does not have your best interest in mind. They act like your friend, but they are talking about you behind your back. They're trying to take your spouse. They'll even, if the kids carpool with their kids, they'll tell your kids bad stuff about you. These are people that are just really not healthy to be around. Also, on a global level, we have dictators that do this. We have other leaders that do this. Cult leaders are known for gaslighting people and making them think that they're crazy and that they have to rely on the cult leader for their version of reality. So why do people act this way? So again, part of it's a deliberate plan to gain control, that they would love nothing more than to have you rely on them and to isolate you from people. Again, that mostly the people that would convince you that this is not a good relationship, they try to get you away from those people first. Also, people learn it in family of origin, but again, people are still 100% responsible for their gaslighting behavior, regardless of how they got to it. I tell people that, you can, even if the person learned this from their parents, they still need to work on themselves and get help. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you need to stay with them while they're getting that help. Sometimes people have conditions of you need to attend therapy on a regular basis, not just go once and tell me that the therapist thinks you're fine, which sometimes gaslighters will do that, but actually attend therapy and do the work. And then there's a wait and see period to see if they will get back together with a person. Many times people split up these relationships and they realize that they're much healthier, not only emotionally, but also physically, that they're sleeping better, their health is better since they've gotten away from this person. People that are in these types of relationships with a gaslighter tend to have constant anxiety, which also causes insomnia, which also makes your ADHD symptoms worse. So, and again, they tend to not take any personal responsibility. And if they do go to therapy, it's because they tell me that they need the other person fixed. And if I confront them about their behavior, sometimes they'll get very angry with me. They will yell. They will leave the office. They'll tell me that they know how to be a therapist better than I know how to be a therapist, even though that's not their training. That's not their field. Because again, narcissistic rage. If you set boundaries with people like this, they tend to respond with rage, and they use that as a way to control people, because you may not be likely to set your boundary again if you know that that person is going to be yelling and screaming at you. Or they also do a thing called stonewalling, which is where they completely ignore you and act like you don't exist. And that's a way to punish you, because what they want you to do is they want you to beg for forgiveness. They want you to work your damnedest to try and get attention and to get them to talk. And that makes them do stonewalling even more. One of the best ways to break them with their stonewalling is you ignore them. And they stop because they can't handle not having attention, and they try to hoover you back in. The best thing you can do, though, is just walk away. But I know that's not always possible in all relationships. So again, we already talked about this, but there's a scapegoat and a golden child. It's whoever the parent deems as loyal. And again, this is not real loyalty. This is what the parent thinks they can get out of the kid. You see this sometimes in addictive behavior. So addicts will have the golden child scapegoat and gaslighting. I think Dak Shepard, who's married to Kristen Bell, he was recently on a podcast that he relapsed in his addictions. And he admitted that he was gaslighting his family into making them think that they were persecuting him for using, when in fact he actually was using. So yeah, I give him credit for being open about that kind of behavior, because addicts will gaslight people into thinking, how dare you accuse me of using, that you're being rude to me, you're being insensitive, that you're accusing me of using when they're clearly using. Also, children can become parentified, which means that if you have a scapegoat and a golden child, sometimes one of the children winds up being the parent for the other kids, because the gaslighting parent is just emotionally not available. And that becomes sometimes adults that tend to take over responsibility for things, or they try to be perfect. There are a lot of perfectionism. So one of the organizations that can help with this is a 12-step program called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. It's adultchildren.org. And people can meet with other people who have been through similar parenting and do a 12-step program, because this does impact how people relate to others in their life, and whether they seek help for things like ADHD too. Parents put kids in a double bind. So if you have a kid that it's hard, if they have ADHD, it's hard to get them out the door and ready in the morning. If you're a mean parent that puts your kid in a double bind because you want to have control over them, you turn on the TV and then tell them to get ready at the same time, when you know that they're not going to be able to tear away from the TV. So it's a way of putting a kid in a no-win situation. And again, if parents have personality disorders like narcissistic personality disorder, kids can mimic those behaviors as a survival mechanism. If you can't beat them, join them. So it's a way that the kid can at least, survive in that environment. And sometimes you'll see people, again, that carry these behaviors into adulthood. It's called fleas. So from the saying, if you lay down with a dog, you get fleas, meaning if you're around a parent with narcissistic tendencies, you may pick up some of those yourself. Now, again, it doesn't mean that you qualify for a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, but you may tend to have a fallback behavior that when you have made a mistake, instead of owning up to it, you blame the other person. So again, you may have learned that from your family of origin. A toxic parent may deny that a kid with ADHD has symptoms because they feel like any kind of sign of imperfection in their kids reflects poorly on them, or it takes the focus off of them. So you see people that will not get their kids help even if they have ADHD, because then the focus would be on the child and not the parent. Or again, they don't even want to think about the fact that they could have produced a child that has issues. And it gets to a pathological level where you have a kid that is really having a hard time in school and the parent will refuse to get the kid treatment. So again, this is a slow process. So the behaviors change slowly over time. And with ADHD, sometimes we're just trying to go through the day. We're not paying attention to the detail stuff, right? Because paying attention to details impaired. So you may start seeing that things are being moved on you, that you're being told that, that you came home too late when you're coming home at the same time you come home from work every day. You may have a family member tell you, hey, I think you don't seem like yourself. I think there's something going on here. I think that maybe you may need to talk to somebody. And if you mention anything about that to the gaslighter, they'll tell you what a terrible person that person is and how they've always tried to get the two of you apart and that they don't know why this family member hates them. They will really turn it into that other person's evil. And they will tell their victims, and I use victim and survivor interchangeably. I go with whatever clients are referring to themselves as. They'll tell victims that their family members have said that they're trouble, and that if they try to leave the relationship, nobody's going to believe them. And unfortunately, sometimes family members have been convinced by the gaslighter that this person is unstable because already you have ADHD. And if you have a family member that has not done their research in ADHD and has a bias against it, they may be more likely to believe the gaslighter when they say that you're really losing it. So unfortunately, these gaslighters can be very charming if they want to get something out of someone or want to con somebody. If they don't have anything to get out of you, they'll just treat you like you don't exist or they're mean to you. So what the gaslighter wants is, again, to isolate you from people. So if they say, well, your family all knows you're crazy too, then you're less likely to leave the relationship and seek help from your support system. So again, this is a pattern in gaslighters' relationships and also in the workplace. They tend to, again, avoid getting help. And the best option is to cut ties to the gaslighter, which means you go no contact, which means blocking phone numbers, blocking emails, blocking social media. But it's difficult to do this, especially if you have kids. So in that version of events, you go low contact, which means you only talk about the kids and their schedules. So there are parenting apps like Talking Parents, like Our Family Wizard, where you talk through the app, it dates and timestamps everything. So you have evidence that the person read it. You can have a very ironclad parenting plan that says where kids should be exchanged, at what times, how long do you need to wait at the exchange point before the visitation reverts back to you. So it's really important to have a family attorney, a family law attorney that knows about narcissistic behavior and how those people can react in parenting situations. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. So the process of trauma bonding, of love bombing, devaluing, violence, an attempt to leave, and hoovering. These are people that will do future faking. So if one of the reasons why you left is because not only is the person abusive, but they had these promises of marriage and family. And now all of a sudden, once you've left, they start telling you, yes, we'll get married and yes, we'll have kids. But as soon as you get back in the relationship, they tell you, nope, because you did something that now I think that I shouldn't do that anyway. They blame it on you. And then the cycle continues. So when you get into a fight with this person, your adrenaline and your cortisol, the stress producing hormone, go up. When you have that honeymoon phase, your dopamine and oxytocin kick in. So your brain gets addicted to this pattern. This is trauma bonding. So when you leave this type of relationship, it can be a similar feeling to a drug withdrawal. It can be very intense. Many times people leave this relationship are suicidal because sometimes the gaslighters just drop them like a hot potato, or because the intense emotions that go along with it. These are people that have been told that they're nothing without the gaslighter, and it can be really hard for them to even remember what their likes and dislikes are. So one of the things I work with people on are, what foods do you like and not like? Because they've been told that whatever their likes and dislikes are, that they're irrelevant. So sometimes we have to kind of start building from the ground floor up. So why are we vulnerable to people that gaslight us? Because of self-esteem issues. We have to work 5 times harder as all the other kids at school, and we only get half the amount of work done. So we feel like there's something wrong with us. We feel ostracized from people. We tend to look for the best in people. We tend to look out for the underdog. There are people called covert narcissists, which tend to blame other people and say like, oh, nobody at work likes me, and I've done all this work and nobody gives me credit. And they tend to look like kind of pious, like they are again, upstanding citizens. They tend to be quieter, not that overt narcissists that we're used to, like where they're flashy and the typical narcissist. So it's tricky picking out the covert or vulnerable narcissist because they just look like they're very self-effacing. So that's something to watch out for, our covert narcissists. We are particularly prone to them because we tend to look out for people that need help, because we are sensitive to people that are suffering, but their suffering isn't real. It's a way to lure you in. Also, we tend to have a lack of acceptance from other people. So when someone loves bombs you, it feels great. And finally, you feel like somebody loves you and accepts you for who you are. And again, we're more likely to have PTSD because of genetic markers that we have that other people don't have. And we're more likely to have a history of trauma. And when you're with someone like this, they will specifically look for people with trauma. In fact, when you meet these people, they will ask you, what's your deepest, darkest secret? What's the worst thing you've ever been through? And it's not that they're being empathic with you. It's because they're collecting data and they'll use it against you later. If they ask you, like, what's the most disappointing thing in your life? You may say, well, my relationship with my sister is not what I want it to be. If you stand up for yourself, one of the things they'll say is, oh, no wonder your sister doesn't talk to you anymore. It's because you're like this. So they are saving up ammunition. They also do something called trauma dump on you, which means that if you go on a date with these people, they will automatically go into their history of trauma very inappropriately and way too early in a relationship, because they're trying to suck you in. They're trying to be vulnerable. So you are more likely to accept their range of behavior. So why are people with ADHD, again, more vulnerable to these relationships? We're more emotionally vulnerable because we usually have been hurt before. We've been told not to trust our intuition because there's something wrong with us. So when we get that gut feeling telling us to stay away from this person, we're more likely to not listen to that and to just go for it and say, you know what, I can fix this, I can do fine. We're more likely to tolerate dysfunction. We're more likely to have a cycle of guilt and shame from having ADHD and some other stuff that goes with it, like depression, anxiety, bipolar. And so we're more likely to already have a cycle of guilt and shame, and the gaslighter preys upon it. So sometimes we think that this is what we deserve because we're bad people, when that's not true at all. But the gaslighter will hone in on that. If the gaslighter knows that you had issues in school and that led to you having difficulty getting along with people, or you've always felt shame about your grades, they will be sure to bring that up. Anytime that you have made a mistake, which we're allowed to as people to make mistakes, or if you haven't succeeded in something, it will be like, oh, well, it's just like, when you were in school. I mean, this is like, if you're a fan of Harry Potter, Dolores Umbridge is a horrible person in the books, but she says everything with a smile. And these people will say the most evil things to you with a smile. They will also have a change in their facial expressions that looks like they're wearing a mask. So people have told me that they will have the gaslighter, they'll be at like their place of worship. Like one example was this, she was with her husband at their place of worship. He was something in the place of worship, like he was like a higher level person. And he was, everybody thought he was great. And as soon as they left to get in the car, his face completely changed and he turned and said something really vile to her. Because that's what these people do. They wear a mask for the public, but then when you're with them, you get to see who they actually are. So also, we may tend to unconsciously seek out someone that appears to be pulled together. These are people that look really good on paper sometimes. We're like, oh, they're good at organizing their money and they're good at, being on time to things. Super cool. Maybe that'll kind of rub off on me. And again, this can also be signs of a controlling person as well. And again, ADHD relationships tend to start out intensely. So it may be that you think that, well, this is just kind of like the relationships I have, but gaslight relationships also start out intensely, but again, it's usually kicked up a couple notches. And keep in mind that everyone's vulnerable to gaslighting. People with ADHD, depression, anxiety, any medical issue, other than the ones I've just mentioned, or grief also makes you more at risk because we're vulnerable. So this is what I've been told in sessions. So he told me I needed to go to therapy because my ADHD was intolerable. When we got there, he told the therapist I needed to be fixed. He didn't take responsibility for any of his behavior, including slamming me into a wall. In this case, the person had to leave in the middle of the night with nothing with her because except her dog, because he was increasing his physical abuse. She told me I was the best thing ever happened to her, so love bombing, and that she never met anyone like me. Once we moved in together, she constantly accused me of cheating, projection, and told me if I hung out with female coworkers, she was done. It turns out she was cheating on me on the entire relationship with multiple people. He told me if I left, I'd never see my kids again. He'll destroy my reputation just like he did those other exes. Here's a woman that had ADHD that had worked very hard to start her own business, had went through many trials and tribulations, getting it off the ground, adhering to her treatment. And here's a guy that had destroyed his ex's businesses by slandering them. And there was actually a court case against one of the exes filed a charge of slander against him and libel. Slander is when you talk badly about someone and impacts their livelihood. Libel is when you write something and it impacts their livelihood. So she knew that he had done this before to people. So she was terrified that he was going to do this again. She was told when they met, he talked about how crazy his ex was and how, she had accused him of this because he knew that she could look up on their clerk of courts, that this person had filed these claims against him. So he preemptively said, you know what, she's crazy. She was stalking me. I turned her down, and this is what she did. When in fact, it turns out he actually did work at destroying the ex's business. So she tells our kids I made her leave and I'm abusive and crazy. She even called my mom multiple times and told her how crazy I was. My mom's my best friend. And she even admitted that she was wondering if what my ex said was true. This is how good these people can be at manipulating and convincing people. They will say like, oh, so-and-so, they've got a real drug problem. They've been drinking a lot. So because it's dismissive, it's saying that whatever comes out of your mouth may not be reality. And that's exactly what they want people to believe. He told me I couldn't be trusted with money, even though I actually did okay in that area. So here's someone with ADHD that actually was parentified, which isn't good, but she was really on top of the money because she had to manage it for her family because both her parents had ADHD. He talked me into signing my accounts over to him. I did in part so he'd stop harassing me about how irresponsible I was. Now I have to ask him for an allowance. Again, this gets into economic financial abuse. And this happens more often than you'd think. Remember the first time I saw him drop his mask in public, quietly says the most horrible things to me with a smile on his face. He's held in high regard in our community and no one would believe me if I told him what life with him is like. He'll have a big smile, but as soon as we're alone, his face completely changes to just no feeling. People like this will have cognitive empathy, which means they'll ask you how your day was, how life's going, but they don't really care about the answer. They just feel like that's what they're supposed to do, but they aren't really listening to you. I keep trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong. Now, if this doesn't explain ADHD a lot of times, right? You grow up kind of like, and as an adult, wondering what everyone else knows that you don't. And that's also the name of a really good book on ADHD by Michelle Novotny. What does everyone else know that I don't? But this is where, again, we try our damnedest to try and make things work, blame the ADHD when in fact it was someone that's a sociopath. She told me I didn't need to take my Adderall. It was making me out of control. I think what it was doing was helping me see more clearly. I shouldn't be treated this way, and I was speaking out. This is someone that had their spouse flush their Adderall down the toilet because the spouse said, you don't need that. It's making you crazy. When in fact, again, the person was able to tell their spouse that they were done with this and that the spouse is being out of control. And her response was to call his psychiatrist. And again, the psychiatrist can't call because he didn't have a release to talk to her, but she left a message on his voicemail saying how terrible her husband was. Now the medicine was making him crazy. And the psychiatrist actually said to him, you need to get out of this relationship. My husband would hide my prized possessions. When I couldn't find them, he'd blame my ADHD. He'd say I was irresponsible, couldn't be trusted. When I couldn't find my wedding ring, he accused me of not caring about him or our marriage. I started putting sticky notes saying where I put things. That's how I eventually caught what he was doing. I told him I was done. He held me at gunpoint. I was not going to get out of this relationship alive. I left 3 years ago in the middle of the night with just my dog and the clothes on my back, and I cut off all contact. I'm still working on rebuilding my life. She did not have kids with him. Again, if she did have kids with him, we'd have to talk about going low contact instead. This is Sandra. She was diagnosed with anxiety when she was in 9th grade, with ADHD when she was a freshman in college. Because sometimes what happens is you're able to compensate up to a certain point. And when you work with people with high IQs, they tend to start having issues, starts popping out in college when they have to make up their own schedule. They have to create their own study habits, and it can be very difficult for people. So it's not unusual that people are diagnosed in college. She said she always felt less than in her life and a history of not speaking up for needs and relationships. She had been dating John for 2 years. She was currently in her second trimester. She said her relationship with John started with John telling her she's the best thing ever happened to him and that her anxiety was endearing. So this is the first time that someone had told her that her anxiety was cute. She said that after they started living together, some of her items would go missing. He would tell her that if she didn't have ADHD, she'd be much easier to deal with at home. He blamed her carelessness for the missing items. Sandra found some of her missing items under the bed. She sees counseling in regards to ending her relationship. And she did actually wind up ending her relationship, and also saw a family law attorney because at that point she was pregnant. So there was a parenting plan hashed out before the baby was born. So Cassie grew up with her mother and 3 siblings. Her mother has a history of alcoholism. Cassie's mother treated children as either the golden child or the scapegoat and seemed to alternate good and bad child, again, very common. She would triangulate amongst the children. She would pit them against each other. She's not speaking to either one of her siblings. She had blocked her siblings' emails, phone numbers. Her mother has cancer, and her siblings created an email, which she didn't catch because, it was a created email, and said, and then she texted her from a Google number. So you can come up with a Google number that nobody recognizes. And her text said, after the way you treat everyone, the very least you can do is take care of mother in her final months. Turns out the siblings didn't want to take care of the mother because the mother had narcissistic tendencies. Cassie didn't know how to respond. So we talked about this in therapy. She wound up saying goodbye to her mother. She said, I'm going to visit her one time and that's it. The mother, even though on her deathbed, was pitting the kids against each other and still doing golden child and scapegoat, and said to Cassie, I've always loved you the most. Your siblings have never been good people. And she was like, here she is dying and she's still doing this. People that are narcissists, when they're sick or dying, it doesn't make them any less of a narcissist. So gaslighting, again, is a motivation to control people. Poor communication is something else. That's having difficulty expressing your needs, what you're thinking, what you're saying are 2 different things. And communication skills, you've had difficulty applying them or you haven't maybe learned them. But gaslighting is an ulterior motive to separate you from support systems and to isolate you. So codependency. So we're prone to codependency. Now, this is very culture bound. You see this more often in individualistic cultures, codependency, because like in Mediterranean families, this is just kind of how you roll. Everybody's in each other's business. So the saying I use is you're setting yourself on fire to keep someone warm. You are covering for a partner's behavior. You have marks on your arms from them grabbing you, but you tell people that you ran into the wall. Your partner is too drunk to go to work, so you call and make an excuse for them. You blame yourself for their addictive behaviors. You judge yourself as being a terrible person when in fact you're allowed to make mistakes. And you have a need to feel needed, that you feel needed and complete when you're taking care of someone else. And we tend to have this tendency. Also, if you're in a helping profession like counselors, doctors, nurses, teachers, you're more likely to have this type of personality, be prey to a gaslighter. So no contacting, and you block all forms of contact. You don't respond to any attempts to communicate. People will gaslighters will send out flying monkeys. Flying monkeys are people that will try to send messages from the gaslighter to you. And you just tell that person, I'm not entertaining any talk about this person, because the gaslighter will be really good at playing the poor, sad role and say, I really love them so much. Please get them to come back to me. And that person, not realizing how terrible relation this was, will say, so-and-so really misses you and he's really having a hard time. And you're like, yeah, no, we're not talking about him. Also, no contacting with co-parenting. You need to go low contact instead. There's something called parallel parenting, again, that you only talk about things like schedule changes. You do that all in a parenting app. You don't talk over text or email or phone, because those devolve into arguments, or the gaslighter's picking on the co-parent. Also, again, have exchange points already mapped out, usually in a neutral location that the person is not going anywhere near your house. And you can also write in there stuff about needing contact, regular contact with the child, so the parent doesn't try to reduce contact when they're at the other parent's house, so you can talk to your kid every night before they go to bed, things like that. So one of the best things you can do is do gray rock technique, which means you don't give them any response whatsoever. If you go to a family event, like for the holidays, and you know you're going to see this person, have somebody with you as kind of a buffer so they can kind of pick up on when the gaslighter might be seeking you out to pick on you, and then leave. So also have a set amount of time that you go to these gatherings. So also threats may cause a victim to continue to stay in a relationship. I now have had people threaten that they're going to be deported, that they're going to be reported to ICE if they don't, shape up, quote unquote. Also, they may threaten to harm or kill the person's family or pets. People need to make sure they take their pets with them. Many domestic violence shelters don't take animals, but any vet usually will take animals in pro bono until you find a place to stay. So again, these people can be very charismatic, and people that are in these relationships may feel like no one's going to understand when they tell them how bad it is. So they will try to hoover you. They'll also withhold important documents, such as passports, and make you earn them back. People have been trafficked into sexual activity. They have been trafficked into becoming drug mules for these types of people. I mean, this gets into some really serious stuff. And again, have had people that will say to the partner that they're going to get them deported. So again, gaslighting is a form of emotional psychological abuse, which is a form of domestic violence. And the more you stay in these relationships, the greater chance you have of being killed. This also includes being killed in the workplace. And again, vets will take your pets pro bono and no charge. If you need a family law attorney, there are several that will work pro bono. You can look those up online. The most lethal time is when you leave the relationship. So, and every time you go through this cycle of abuse and honeymoon phase, it gets worse each time. So co-parenting, you can get a parent coordinator appointed by the court. That's usually a person with a mental health background or an attorney that works with the two of you to get you all on the same page with co-parenting, especially if one parent's being pretty belligerent. Parenting plans need to be very specific down to the letter of what's going to be expected of each parent. And again, you can find pro bono or what's called low bono attorneys. So again, the golden child may now become a scapegoat when you cut off contact with a toxic parent. Parents will threaten to disown adult children. The one person I worked with, she and her siblings would joke about who was disowned that week because there's always somebody who was being disowned. And it turns out that when their parent died, none of them got anything when she was pitting them against each other on who's going to inherit stuff. Also, you may see some gaslighters that find new narcissistic supply and they will just completely cut off contact with their partner and the kids. Again, flying monkeys will try to contact you about the person. Flying monkeys comes from the Wizard of Oz. From the flying monkeys would send messages from the Wicked Witch. So again, post-relationship it can be pretty common for people to be suicidal afterwards. On Reddit, which is kind of a forum for different pages, there's one called narcissistic abuse, and you can read about other people who have been through similar situations, and that can be helpful. It's RADDIT, so it's narcissistic abuse. There's also a page called Raised by Narcissists, and I just caution you to look at that a little bit at a time because it may be triggering to you. So domestic violence hotline, there are domestic violence websites. There's one that has a big X on the screen, so you can get out of it right away as someone's walking up behind you, but keep in mind it still is in your search history. You can also get an injunction, which means depending on your state that the firearms need to be turned into the sheriff or police. And the injunction applies to work and home. And also that person cannot have contact with your kids as long as the injunction is in place. It depends. Sometimes some judges will okay it if it's just emotional abuse. And I say just, meaning that most judges won't okay it unless it's physical abuse. So there is kind of a bias against emotional abuse. So also it's important to get consistent treatment for ADHD. Stimulant medication is found to be the most effective treatment, but you're more able to think through planning and the whole process of getting out. You're more able to seek another job and get hired by someone else if you have a good interview, and that leads to being able to have your executive functions on point. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been found to be effective for ADHD, dialectical behavior therapy as well, and learn the red flags, like pushing too quickly in the beginning of a relationship to move in together, speaking really badly about their exes, telling you that they're a narcissist. You will have people tell you that. Believe them when they tell you that. Bottom line, abuse is abuse is abuse. It doesn't matter what kind. Education on warning signs needs to start early. I encourage parents to talk about healthy boundaries with their kids as early as elementary school. You know, what's a good friend and a not so good friend? How should people treat each other? Know what your rights are. Like, you have the right to say no at any time. You have the right to do less than what's humanly possible. You have the right to feel safe, and you have the right to change your mind. So in the workplace, you want to look up the U.S. definition of harassment in the workplace, because the behavior you're experiencing may qualify for that. Also, the U.S. has the Violence Against Women Act of 1994. That was allowed to expire in February 2019. It also includes male victims of domestic violence. The bill would allow you to, if you needed to take a break from work to find a new place to live, your job was not in jeopardy. You could go back to your job. The House of Representatives passed it again in April 2019, but it's still sitting on the floor of the Senate, and it's been largely ignored. So women and men that are victims of domestic violence no longer have the same protections that they used to. In 2018, the U.S. Department of Justice changed the definition of domestic violence to only include physical violence. They dropped emotional, economic, sexual, and psychological abuse from the definition of domestic violence. So it delegitimized those as a form of domestic violence, unfortunately. There's no reason given by the DOJ as to why they made this change. Still, nobody knows why. They have not disclosed anything about why that change was made. And rarely does an abusive relationship start with physical violence. So speak out with your vote. Contact your representatives. If you are a clinician, contact or join your professional organizations at the policy level. Most professional organizations do have a policy level or policy committee where they go to state and federal legislatures, so you can talk about, what you've seen, the boots on the ground, so to speak, of people and what they've experienced in their lives. So this is Sandra. A follow up. I'll just let you read on your own, but she did leave the relationship, but this is when she was pregnant, but he began hoovering her, harassment and stalking. She went to a family attorney. She's able to get a judge and issue an injunction. So when she was giving birth, he was not allowed on the floor. He was not allowed to be present because of the injunction, and she had security. The hospital set up security to make sure that he did not get in. Eventually, the injunction expired. A detailed parenting plan was established, and she and her daughter are doing well. She uses a parenting app to communicate with John, and they have that parallel co-parenting style where they really don't have anything to do with each other. He doesn't attend the doctor's visits. That's been agreed to in the parenting plan. He needs to call the doctors to get an update on how his child's doing at her doctor's appointments because he's so volatile. That was put in the parenting plan. Cassie, she decided to go see her mother. Like I said, the mother said that the sisters were worthless and Cassie was the only good one. And she realized that she was gonna have to get her own closure because her mother was pretty sick. So the more time you spend away from someone like this, the greater chance that you will not go back to the relationship. It can feel really terrible in the beginning, but we can survive our feelings. It's really important to get outside help to go through this because it can be really a challenge to build up your likes, your dislikes, just who you are as a person, and to continue without this person. And also explore what made you prone to these relationships. So here's articles. Why are people with ADHD more prone to gaslighting? I did a podcast episode on that. The 11 warning signs of gaslighting. And if you have any questions about alligators, let me know. So what questions do you have? I think I went like way over time, but
I did. So I'm looking.
I watched one off too. I had my alarm set. I just kept going.
Well, you had a lot to offer, so we appreciate it. So there's a couple of comments. One is folks who say they get a lot of gaslighting from their kids, the 13 and a 19-year-old. And
you also have gaslighters accuse you of gaslighting. I wrote a psychology article about that too. Teenage girls are really good at gaslighting, and teenage boys, but teenage girls can particularly be sneaky about it. And so it's really important that you call that out and you say that that's being manipulative and that's not okay. And to ask kids, what is it that you need? I find asking kids, what is it that you're trying to, what are you trying to get, or what do you need from me, can really break through a lot of that. But you do have some kids that are kind of born con artists. And it's something that you really have to keep tabs on and make sure that they go and talk to a counselor.
Always good advice. There's really no, I'm not getting any questions.
Okay.
I mean, my experience was, wow, this is so much information and there's so much to process. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about a variety of clients who I see and wondering, how would we define this? How would I help them deal with it? And in fact, somebody said, Yolanda said, she sees these enmeshed relationships with clients and their parents. So it's certainly not unfamiliar. And there's somebody, we just have one more message. Is there recovery? Nancy asks if there's recovery for a gaslighter. So for the
it depends if the person is willing to get help. I mean, that's always the $64,000 question, right? Is that, are you willing to get help? If you are invested in getting better and you're invested in therapy, yes, there is a chance. Absolutely, because we wouldn't be in the professions we're in if we didn't think people could change. However, you have to be willing to confront the fact that you have behaviors that aren't healthy for you. And then also people that have true personality disorders tend to have the egocentric personality where they think they don't have a problem. And it's very difficult for them to get treatment because they don't think they have issues. But if the person is willing to confront or own their behavior and they're willing to put in the work in therapy, yeah, there's definitely hope.
That's a great question. Yeah. So it's hard. And I would imagine it's hard to predict who might be willing to allow things to become dystonic instead of syntonic.
Right. So dystonic would be that you're having behaviors that aren't consistent with your values and you feel funny about it. Like you feel guilt or shame. That would be dystonic. That's like most people. If they do something like rob a bank, they're going to feel bad about it. Right. But if you are a sociopath or a narcissist and you do that, you just think that everyone else got a problem. Why can't they, it was justified in doing it. But again, if you're willing to seek help and own your part of the relationship or own your own behavior, yeah, there's a chance of getting help. And also I've seen people that have been the victims of these people be able to rebuild and have really successful, happy lives. So there's hope for people that have been in these relationships. That doesn't mean you're going to get into another one. I've seen people go on to having healthy, stable relationships.
So there's a couple more questions. Amy asks, is it common for the narcissist to gaslight you into thinking that you are the narcissist?
Yeah, I have an article in Psychology Today about that, about when the gaslighter says that you're the gaslighter. That's a way of just deflecting from their own behavior. I don't know if you watch the show Euphoria. It's about a teenager that's addicted, but she is basically being called out for her addiction and her mother wants to take her to rehab. So one of the things she does is she points out something one of her friends did. So they start fighting during her intervention and she sneaks out the door. I mean, that's classic gaslighting stuff. You do a smoke and mirrors thing where you bring up something else like you're the gaslighter, you're the crazy one. And that's how they try to get away with what they're doing.
And it's one last question because we are just coming to the end of our time. How long does the treatment generally take to rebuild?
It really depends on the person. It's hard for us to say, any counselor, how long someone will be in treatment because everybody's needs are so individual, but you can certainly ask someone that, and it depends on therapeutic orientation too. So when you call a counselor, I would just say, how often do you pace sessions and how will I know I no longer need to come in anymore?
Ellen, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a question about the reforming of the abuser or the gaslighter. Are you aware of people having reformed? And is there any information that you have about the likelihood of the person reforming based on whether they are a man or a woman?
I have not seen statistics on that. But if the person realizes, again, if they realize that I'm having behavior that I've learned, or that my behavior is not working and I think I have a problem, and they are willing to contact a counselor and put in the work and do the homework. And, counseling is hard work. I mean, therapy is not fun. It's hard. And people are willing to go through that. Yes, there's a chance of them getting better, but they have to be able to put in the work.
I'll be more specific. Are you are you aware of a man having reformed?
I'm not sure what you mean. So I'm hesitant to answer that.
In your clinical experience, has a man?
I have seen men and women that have had this behavior that they have put in a lot of work, and it's a continual process. But yeah, I've seen people that have gone on to having healthy relationships. But I'm not going to give you any absolutes.
Right.
So,
I was asking about a man. I was asking about a man, right? So you've
okay.
seen
So I'm done answering. So are there other questions?
Yeah, there's
have
a
you
question.
seen a woman reform?
Excuse me. Next question.
Yes. So there's actually two questions, but I'm just going to read one because we are almost out of time. How this person is wondering how she can separate from her family, actually her sister, but try to keep a relationship with kids and cousins.
It's tricky. It's tricky, especially if that person is going to badmouth you to other people, but chances are they've already badmouthed everybody to everybody else. So I have seen people go no contact with siblings, but still maintain contact with their nieces and nephews, especially if they're adults. Now, if they're children, that's a different story. But they've remained in contact with nieces and nephews because at some point the gaslighter will alienate everybody in the family. But it may be that for your own emotional health and physical health, and maybe that those relationships aren't going to be able to be continued, which is a really difficult thing. I mean, choosing to go no contact is something that people do not do lightly. It's when there's been a pattern of sociopathic abuse that it's the only way that someone can have peace.
Okay, we're going to end it there. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So much information, so much great information. I'm sure this leaves us with more questions in some ways than with answers. Stephanie, perhaps you'll come back another time and
I'd be happy to
talk some more. That would be great. So thank you all for coming. This is recorded. It will be posted on our website along with the slides. And have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care. So we can actually unmute everyone, huh? Okay, well, I'm going to end the session.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You don't want to do a debrief?
I'm going to say good night for now.